Welcome to VeeBee Coding. You can call me B. I'm sure you probably know how to take the sum of an amount or number column for a whole table, or maybe find the max timestamp as well. But what if you want to find the sum per category or per ID? And what if you want to find the max record or the last record per category? So we'll go over a few useful tools to achieve that. We will cover lead versus lag. We will calculate the sum of an amount column per a particular group or column by using partition by and lag. And also, again, find the last record per category. So what is lead versus lag? So lag means you can push the value from a previous row into the current row, and lead means you can pull in the value from the next row into the current row. In our example today, we are going to be looking at our general ledger for accounting. We have a GL account for telephone expenses, and we want to grab the sum of all of the telephone expenses per department, per accounting period, per fiscal year. So looking at our general ledger, we want to narrow down the noise so we can include in our where clause exactly the expense code is, let's say, 501. So that'll exclude other expenses like office supplies, rent expenses. You just want your telephone expenses. And then to calculate the sum per department, we can do sum the amount over partition by, and we want to do it by departments, period, and fiscal year. And then you can order by fiscal year and period. And at the end, you can give that entire calculation an alias. And in this case, we'll just call it amount. So now you go from all of this busy noise down to just one amount per period. So using that query that we used before, we are going to leverage that in CTE, or Common Table Expression. So in other words, we are going to use this query instead of saving the results into a table or saving this query as a SQL view. We can use the temporary results from CTE in our grand query down below. So to do this, just type in with, give it a name. In this case, I call it main, as, and then surrounded by parentheses, put in that entire query that we had before, which means down below in our grand selects, when we reference the above table, the above query, we do this by just saying from and then say the same name. In this case, we say from main. We will look at grabbing the amount from the previous period. If you want to compare period amounts, you do this with lag. So we do lag, the amounts, over partition by department and fiscal year. And just to reiterate, down below here, we are saying from main because main is the name we gave this query up here, and we are saying from amounts because we gave this entire calculation the alias called amount. So that's where that name is being used down here. We can calculate the rolling sum from period to period using sum the amount over partition by department and fiscal year. Or if you do not want to have the rolling sum stop at the end of the fiscal year, you just want to continue rolling from year to year, all you do is copy that same string And in this version, only have department. You would take out the fiscal year part. So this is how it looks. We have our grand amounts, utilizing CTE to help calculate that for us in a more clean way. Using lag, we can show the previous amounts value. So you can see all of that moving down or shifting down one row. We have our rolling sum or rolling total for the fiscal year. And as soon as we hit the fiscal year 2026, it cuts off and it starts all over again. It continues to grow. And then we also have our grand total, regardless of the fiscal year. We just want to see the total history since the beginning of time, or when that account was started or started to get used by that department. So just a quick note, if you did not want to use CTE, what would happen? What would it look like? So basically, this might be a little hard to see on the screen, but basically I just grabbed that full sum partitioned by department, period, and fiscal year and pasted it where we would have had the alias. So we have our sum partitioned by surrounded by another sum partitioned by. What would happen? So you would get this error message, windowed functions cannot be used in the context of another windowed function or aggregate. In short, use CTE. So as a quick bonus, what if you wanted to find the last record per group? So to do this, you would just do your select from, in this case, the general ledger or GL. Give it an alias. I'm just saying it as A. Because we are focusing on one kind of expense, such as telephone expenses or rent expenses, I'm going to go ahead and say where the expense code is 562, just for our example. And then do where the timestamp is equal to the max timestamp from GL, the same table as before, but this time with an alias of B, where expense code is 562 again, because we want to compare apples to apples, and where the departments of this table is equal to the department of this table. Again, it's the GL, but this time we just want to make sure we have our connection straight. We are grabbing the max timestamp per department. And with that, let's hop over to Management Studio. So in preparing for today, I have already created a table called GL for our general ledger. So this contains data for fiscal years 2025 and 2026. We have 3 different departments. We have ABC, DEF, and GHI. We have multiple expense codes. We have telephone expenses, rent expenses, and office supplies. Because for a real life example, you are going to have multiple accounting codes that you'll be working with, or different kinds of charges. We have our amounts and timestamps of when those amounts were posted to the general ledger. There are 3 goals that I want to cover, and that is to get the sum by department and by period. We are going to go over having another column have a running sum, and then lastly find the last charge for each department. So let's start off with our first example. This will be for getting the sum by departments by period. So let's do a select by fiscal year, period, department, expense description. I'll do the sum in just a moment. from the GL. Let's narrow down the type of expenses, such as I don't want to look at telephone and rent and office supplies. So let's do where expense code is equal to 501. And I can just see how this looks right now. There we go. So we have our different departments, but just looking at telephone expenses. So I'm adding a comma up here, and then let's do our sum, the amount column over partition by, we want to get the sum by department, by period and fiscal year. So let's do by department, period, fiscal year, order by fiscal year, and period. And let's give it an alias. So I'll just say as amounts, just to keep it short and sweet, abbreviated. I can say order by department, fiscal year, period. Small typo in the order by. But there we go. Now we have our sum for each department for the period. But the reason why we are seeing the same dollar amount being repeated multiple times per period is because they have multiple charges in that period. So what if you just want to see just the one grand total for the period? Well, you can just add in a distinct. And just to help narrow this down more, let's look at just one department. So let's say the department GHI. And there you have it. Now we just see $1 amount per period for this department. So moving on to our second example, where we are going to have a running sum. So we can take advantage of what we wrote before. I'm just highlighting and did Control-C to copy. This is our second example. And we are going to use that in CTE. So I'll say with, I'm just giving it a name called main, as, open parentheses, paste that in, close the parentheses, and you can indent it with tab to make it easier to read. Just making sure you didn't get cut off at the end there. So in CTE, it does not like it if you have order by up above. But I will keep it in just for now, just to show you what that looks like later on. So select, I'll say fiscal year, period, department, expense description, and amounts from main. And I'm saying from main because that is what we gave this query up here the name. And I can say where department is equal to that GHI. And I'll take this piece out up here. So that way you don't have multiple places where it can be narrowed down. We can have this one location where we can have all of our control. But you will definitely have cases where you want to continue having limitations up here. So this is what the order by error message looks like. It is invalid in views, inline functions, derived tables, and so on. So if you wanted to keep it in just for your own reference, you can do 2 dashes to make it comments. Comments will turn the text green and then they will not execute. Or you can highlight and just backspace to get rid of it entirely. Up to you if you want to keep it as a reference. So now let's do a quick view of the previous periods total if you wanted to have that comparison. So let's do sum amount. And I'm using this AMT abbreviation because that is the alias that we gave this whole calculation. So the amount over partition by department, fiscal year, order by fiscal year, period, and give it an alias. Highlight, execute. We have a typo. And this is nice where it does tell you an indication of where the error lies. So it says on line 28, invalid column for fiscal year, whatever I typed in. So I can say, or see here on row 28, I can look across and see, oh, I have a typo. Fiscal year. And there you go. So this is what gave us our new column at the end. One moment. I went ahead in my notes. So that was summing everything. What I meant to do was type in lag. There we go. So with lag, now you can have the value of the previous month. So for period 1, there was no data prior to this. So because of how we wrote it, it is showing null. For period 2, the previous month's value was this 169.58. The next row down, period 3, the previous month's value was at 164. So you can see it cascading down that way. You can keep this in your notes as is, or continue to build off it. So, but now we are going to continue to build. So we still have that same query as before. So we have our previous month's value. Now we can do our sum, the amounts column. Or I don't need to do the brackets, I could just do amount without the square brackets. Over, partition by, department, fiscal year, and order by fiscal year and period as rolling total or rolling sum for the fiscal year. But what if I want to have a rolling sum regardless of the fiscal year? You want the sum from the beginning of time or whenever the department started to use that GL account number. It's the same thing we have here. So I'm just doing Control-C to copy, go down, Control-V to paste, and just take out the fiscal year in the partition by. Just backspace. And at the end, we can keep it neat to say order by fiscal year, period, department. So even though our table has a column called period, Management Studio might think we are trying to use some other functionality. If you don't like this being highlighted in blue, you can surround it by square brackets, and then it knows for sure you are referencing a actual column called period in your table. Highlight the whole thing and execute. So now we have our rolling total for the fiscal year. And you can see once we get down to period 12 for fiscal year 2025, that's the last time it is adding to itself. So once you get to period 1 of 2026, the rolling sum started over. So that 198 just came right over. But lastly, we have our rolling total for the... Actually, we can change the... We need to change the name of this. It's not the rolling total of the fiscal year. This is rolling total overall. Highlight, execute. And there you go. This is our overall rolling total. So even when you got down to the end of fiscal year 2025 and you go into fiscal year 2026, that sum continued to roll. So now real quick, what if you did not want to use CTE? In other words, what if you did not want to use this like weird subquery up above, reference it down below? What would happen? Let's check it out. So for one thing, because we are not referencing another query with CTE, I need to say from the GL again. I can take out this amount if I wanted to. But now wherever we reference this short abbreviated AMT, again, it came from here. I'm going to copy all of this because that was the source of that amount, AMT, and paste it wherever I see AMT. Backspace and paste and replace and replace. So I know this looks very busy, but this is just the same sum, the amount column, partitioned by, and then that also being surrounded by sum, all of that over partitioned by. So it's very, very busy. Highlight and execute. And then you get this error message. Windowed functions cannot be used in the context of another windowed function or aggregate. So this is why we use CTE. And now lastly, for our third example, finding the last charge for each department. So we are going to switch gears. Instead of looking at telephone expenses, we are going to look at office supplies. So when was the last time a department was charged office supplies? So there's a couple different ways, or there's multiple ways you could do this. But for our first example, we can take advantage of the fiscal year and period. In this case, I concatenated the two to make a distinct tag, if you will. And then when you do equals the max of that same tag from the GL using the same table as before, make sure that when you're comparing data, you want to make sure it's apples to apples. So because we were looking at specifically office supplies up above, we want to make sure we are still looking at office supplies down below, because you don't want to find like the max timestamp of like the last telephone charge when you intended to find the max charge or last charge of office supplies. So we are still doing expense code equals 562 and do a link of where the department from our first table equals department of our second table. But the issue you run into here is if you have multiple charges in the same accounting period. It's fine. It'll get you where you want to be, but it's not as clean. You can have multiple results appear per month. So a better way to do this is to use the timestamp. So just copying from our notes. So we are saying Pulling from our general ledger table, using the alias of A, you can do whatever alias you want to. For expense code is still 562, and the timestamp equals the max timestamp of, again, the general ledger, but this time with an alias of B, where still the expense code is 562, so we are comparing apples to apples, oranges to oranges, and the department from this table equals the department from this table. So using the max timestamp, you can get down to the seconds to help you get just one result per period. Thank you so much for watching. If you have a scenario in mind, feel free to email me at askvbcoding@gmail.com and I'll consider them for future videos. I really appreciate your time and thank you again for watching. Have an awesome night. Goodbye!